The Widow's Séance, the Silent Architect of the Union. The Hook. In the winter of 1862, the most powerful man in the world sat in a dark room, holding the hand of a charlatan. President Abraham Lincoln wasn't there to talk to God. He was there because his wife believed their dead son, Willie, was standing in the corner of the Red Room. But what the history books rarely mention is that among the bells, whistles, and fake levitations of the era's mediums, there was a string of intelligence so accurate it changed the course of the American Civil War. This is the story of how a grieving mother's obsession with the afterlife became the Union's most classified spy network. Chapter 1. The Heavy Velvet of Grief. The fog in Washington, D.C. didn't just sit on the Potomac, it seemed to seep through the floorboards of the White House, carrying the scent of sulfur and swamp water. It was February, and the mansion was a morgue in all but name. Mary Todd Lincoln sat in the shadows of the Blue Room. To the American public, she was the Hellcat, a woman of erratic spending and volatile moods. But in the quiet, she was simply a mother whose heart had been hollowed out. Willie was gone. The typhoid had taken him, and with him the last vestige of light in the Lincoln household. "He is here, Mary," a voice whispered from the gloom. It was Nettie Colburn, a young woman with pale eyes who claimed to hear the vibrations of the Summerland. In the 1860s, Spiritualism was the fastest-growing religion in America. With 600,000 men dying on battlefields from Shiloh to Antietam, an entire nation was reaching into the dark, desperate to touch the hands of their sons. Mary leaned forward, her black silk dress rustling like the wings of a crow. "Tell me what he sees. Does he see the maps? Does he see his father's burden?" This was the strangeness of the Lincoln White House. While the cabinet debated the Emancipation Proclamation, the First Lady was hosting circles. But tonight was different. Nettie's voice changed. It dropped an octave, losing its youthful lilt. The river doesn't flow south for the Union. There is a serpent in the Department of War. He bleeds ink and sells iron." Abraham Lincoln, standing by the door, hidden by the heavy drapes, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter draft. He was a man of logic, a lawyer by trade, yet he lived in a house of ghosts. He stepped into the candlelight, his tall, gaunt frame casting a shadow that stretched across the ceiling. "Miss Colburn," Lincoln said softly, "the serpent has a name in this world. Does he have one in yours?" Chapter 2. The Logic of the Occult. The year 1863 was a pivot point for humanity. In the North, the Industrial Revolution was churning out steel. In the South, a way of life was burning to the ground. But in the drawing rooms of New York and Boston, a different revolution was happening. The story moves to Lafayette Baker, the head of the newly formed Secret Service. Baker was a man of cold steel and zero sentiment. He viewed Mary Todd's mediums as a security risk. He believed they were Confederate spies using the guise of spirits to extract secrets from a grieving woman. However, as Baker began investigating the mediums, men like the flamboyant Charles Foster and the elusive Lord Colchester, he discovered something impossible. These mediums were reporting troop movements before the telegraph lines were even repaired. Information was traveling through the ether. "It's not ghosts, you fool," Baker hissed at his lead investigator, a young veteran named Thomas. "It's a code. They've turned the séance into a dead drop." The narrative weaves through the factual history of the United States Secret Service and its first dark assignments. History tells us Lincoln was a skeptic, but records show he attended nearly 20 séances. The astonishing reality was that the White House had become a hub of a psychic intelligence network. Chapter 3. The Ghost of Fredericksburg. The story shifts to the mud-soaked trenches of Virginia. Here, the spiritualist movement took a physical, gritty form. Soldiers on both sides reported seeing the Lady in White before major massacres. We follow Silas, a fictionalized Union scout based on real accounts of the Blackberry Scouts. Silas is a man who doesn't believe in spirits, but he believes in Mary Todd Lincoln's secret bank account. He is the man on the ground, the vibration that the mediums claim to feel. The story reveals the intricate web, the information loop. Mary Todd would channel spirits in D.C. The code, the specific words she used in her public letters, were signals to operatives in the South. The payoff. When she bought an expensive set of china or a new carriage, she wasn't just spending money, she was laundering funds for the underground and a network of Southern Unionists. Chapter 4. The Final Performance. As the war draws to a close, the tension shifts to Ford's Theater. The astonishing twist of this historical narrative is the intersection of John Wilkes Booth and the occult. Booth was a man of the theater, a man of masks. The story explores the theory that the assassination wasn't just a political act, but a desperate move by a faction that believed Lincoln was using supernatural guidance to dismantle the South. The climax occurs on the night of April 14, 1865. While Lincoln sits in the box, the story pans back to Mary. She feels a cold wind. She isn't looking at the play. She's looking at the empty seat beside her, where she claims she saw the shadow of her son Willie, pointing not at the stage, but at the door behind the president. Historical data points included in the narrative. The Fox sisters, the founders of Spiritualism, and their eventual confession of fraud. The Pinkerton Agency, their role in early White House security and their distrust of the spirit circles. The Emancipation Proclamation, how Lincoln allegedly discussed the timing of the document with spirits to gauge public reaction. The mental health of Mary Todd, a deep, empathetic look at her 1875 insanity trial through the lens of a woman who knew too much. Chapter 5. The Serpent's Ink. The serpent mentioned by the medium wasn't a spirit, it was a ghost in the machine of the Union's bureaucracy. While the North boasted of its industrial might, its greatest weakness was its own paper trail. In the spring of 1863, the War Department was a hive of activity. Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, a man whose beard was as stiff as his resolve, noticed a terrifying pattern. Strategic plans discussed in the silent room of the White House were appearing on the desks of Confederate generals in Richmond within 48 hours. Thomas, the young Secret Service investigator, was assigned to shadow the spiritualists who frequented the First Lady's parlor. He discovered that the séances weren't just for grieving, they were the perfect cover for high-level information exchange. In a room where the lights were extinguished and guests were told to close their eyes and hold hands, a spirit could whisper a troop count into an ear, and no one would ever see a lip move. "The spirits don't leave fingerprints," Thomas reported to Baker, "but they leave a scent, lavender and expensive tobacco." Chapter 6. The Telegram Code. The narrative now dives into the astonishing historical reality of 19th-century cryptography. Mary Todd Lincoln was a prolific writer of telegrams. To the casual observer, her messages to her spiritual advisors in New York were the ramblings of a distressed woman buying mourning jewelry. But Thomas, working with the military telegraphers, began to see a linguistic architecture. Black onyx referred to the number of ironclads being moved to the Mississippi. White lilies meant a delay in the draft. Willie is peaceful was the ultimate green light for a clandestine operation. Mary wasn't a traitor, she was a back channel. She knew the formal cabinet was riddled with Southern sympathizers. By using the Spiritualist network, she was bypassing the compromised official lines to get raw intelligence directly to the president's Black Room scouts. Chapter 7. The Shadows of Gettysburg. July 1863. The heat in Pennsylvania was a physical weight. The story follows Silas, our Union scout, as he infiltrates a Confederate camp near the peach orchard. He isn't looking for cannons, he's looking for a specific man, a medium from Savannah named Julian Vane. Vane claimed to talk to the dead, but his real talent was cold reading. He could look at a Union prisoner's boots and tell you where his regiment had marched from. He could smell the specific clay on a messenger's coat and pinpoint the location of the hidden artillery. The occult war reached its peak during the 3 days of Gettysburg. While the infantry charged into the maw of the angle, Silas and Vane engaged in a silent duel of disinformation. Silas planted spirit messages in the local graveyards, hollowed out headstones filled with false orders, knowing the Confederate seers would find them. The history books credit the high ground for the Union victory. The ghost files suggest it was the moment Lee's scouts started believing in the wrong ghosts. Chapter 8. The Price of the Sight. As the Union began to win, the toll on Mary Todd Lincoln became unbearable. The American public saw her spending $20,000 on curtains as an insult to the dying soldiers. They didn't see that the curtain fabric was being used to smuggle maps of the Richmond defenses. The story takes a dark turn into the 1875 insanity trial. Years after the assassination, Mary's own son, Robert, would put her on trial to commit her to an asylum. The astonishing truth? Robert wasn't trying to steal her money, he was trying to bury the ghost files. He knew that if his mother's involvement in the wartime intelligence network became public, it would delegitimize his legacy. The world wanted a martyr president who saved the Union through divine wisdom, not a man who used his wife's grief-stricken hobby to run a spy ring.
Chapter 9. The Veiled Widow of Bellevue. Mary sat in the Bellevue Place Asylum, her room filled with trunks she refused to open. To the doctors, she was a madwoman obsessed with vibrations. To the history of the USA, she was a tragedy. But in the final pages of this movement, we see Thomas, now an old man, visiting her in secret. "The serpent is dead, Mrs. Lincoln," he whispers. Mary looks out the window, her eyes clear for the first time in years. "The serpent was never the enemy, Thomas. The enemy was the silence. We just filled it with enough noise to win." Chapter 10. The Manhattan Cauldron. While the fields of Gettysburg was still cooling, a different kind of fire was smoldering in the cobblestone labyrinth of New York City. The year was 1863, and the Union was bleeding out. To replenish the ranks, Lincoln signed the Enrollment Act, the first wartime draft in United States history. But in the 5 Points slum, the draft wasn't seen as a patriotic duty, it was seen as a death sentence for the poor. For $300, a rich man could buy a substitute. For a dock worker, $300 was a lifetime of labor he didn't have. Thomas, our Secret Service agent, arrived in Manhattan under the pseudonym Elias Thorne. His mission was no longer about séances in the White House. He was hunting the Copperhead Oracles. These were Southern sympathizers who used the city's obsession with the occult to incite a riot that would pull Union troops away from the front lines. "They're reading the palms of the Irish dockers," Thomas wrote in a coded dispatch to Stanton. "They tell them the spirits see their sons dying in chains. They aren't predicting a riot, they are scripting one."